Hi there, it's Llarold, and today I'm going to talk about how to play Guardian Druid in patch 10.0, the Dragonflight Pre-patch. Bear Druids are a tank I've played for a really long time, way back since Vanilla and the Burning Crusade, when they were technically still feral druids. Druids were the first class to get talent trees in the Dragonflight Alpha, and Bear Druid was extremely strong when the initial tree was unveiled, like crazy good, as strong as Warrior is right now. And then about a month after that initial unveiling, the tree got nerfed by a lot, and since then they've received very few changes. A lot of people, including myself, have taken this opportunity to make jokes or complain about how bad the class is, how weak bears are, and so on, and it's something I've even mentioned in some of my videos. But now here's the part where I have to apologize to the Bear Druid community, because it turns out they're still pretty decent, and they are a lot more fun in Dragonflight than they were in Shadowlands. Bear Druid was the weakest tank in the game toward the end of Shadowlands, but not by an enormous margin. You could tank everything in the game on a Bear Druid. I think this is a common misconception that people have when they talk about best and worst and comparing classes against one another. It's pretty rare that being bad means that a spec doesn't function. Good versus bad usually just means that it makes the game easier or more difficult, and that can be a relative judgment. If you put someone who is extremely practiced and comfortable with a powerful but complex spec like Brewmaster Monk right now, it's gonna be strong in their hands. If you put somebody who is not comfortable on that complex class, it's probably gonna be pretty weak. It's up to the player to maximize the value of a class, and while most of the classes in WoW have historically been relatively similar in terms of complexity, that isn't true at all anymore in Dragonflight. Bear Druid is very simple, and that means the barrier to entry in playing it well is pretty minor. You can be decent at tanking on a Bear Druid with only a little bit of practice, basically no matter who you are, and it genuinely does scale up. You can absolutely tank high-level Mythic Plus and Mythic Raid bosses on a Bear Druid. That is doable. So despite all the complaints that I have made about how Bear is boring and bad in the last few months, that's not true. And I have good news, it's actually still pretty decent. It's maybe the weakest of the 6 tanks overall right now, but I'm not honestly even sure about that. I think it might be better than I've given it credit for this whole time. It certainly does way more AoE damage than I've given it credit for. Even if it is the worst, it's not bad. It has good base mitigation, it has decent defensive cooldowns, it has great AoE damage, and good sustained damage, which is a big change. It has great self-healing now even. It's got everything you want on a tank, except it's really simple, which isn't necessarily even a bad thing. Alright, now let's jump into the important stuff. We'll start with the basics of how you play the class. Basically, you generate rage with Mangle, Thrash, and Moonfire, then you spend that rage on Ironfur to mitigate damage, or Frenzied Regeneration to heal the health back up that you've lost, or Maul to deal more damage. That's actually all there is to it. There are some more complex aspects of the class that involve shifting into cat form or moonkin form to maintain damage over time effects from your other forms when you're not actively tanking, but here's the thing. They don't do enough damage in the pre-patch to matter, so you just stay in bear form and pump out bear damage the whole time. You do have a handful of offensive and defensive cooldowns, and they're all pretty good and pretty straightforward. In terms of how different Bear feels in Dragonflight Pre-patch compared to Shadowlands, it's probably the class that looks the most similar to its Shadowlands version, but it actually has gained a lot of offensive and defensive value through new talents. It's still simple, that's a pretty fair criticism of the current state of Bear Druid, but it isn't bad. Your main rotational skills are still Thrash, Mangle, and Moonfire, but now you have a bunch of talents that buff the value of Moonfire by a massive amount. It costs it to hit multiple targets, it deals 75% more damage, it heals you for 30% of all the damage it deals. It can proc and generate rage. Each target that it hits on those procs will generate rage separately. So you can get, if you're spamming swipe and AoE and you're getting multiple Galactic Guardian procs, you can be getting 16 rage from each proc. Pretty incredible. It's weird that Moonfire is such an integral and meaningful component of the toolkit now instead of just a boring dot that you maintain on enemies, but that's how it works. It's the core of the kit. Very weird. The bad news is, and this is actually kind of frustrating for me, you have to make serious throughput sacrifices in the talent tree in order to pick up the crowd control skills that you have taken for granted for the last several expansions on Druid, like Incapacitating Roar, or Typhoon, or Mass Entanglement. I think this is a really big mistake on Blizzard's part, and I'll get into it a little more in the talent tree breakdown, but they definitely have screwed up some spots in the talent tree. That part of Druid, I think, is pretty bad. And finally, all Druid specs have regained Mark of the Wild. It is now a 3% versatility buff that lasts for an hour, just like all other raid buffs. 3% versatility is pretty nice, so this is good, but I don't think it'll do anything to improve Bear's popularity, because there are already so many balanced Druids and Resto Druids running around, and Feral Druid is very good right now, so there's going to be a lot of those cats running around too. In terms of how strong Bear Druid is in patch 10.0, it's definitely a matter of what you're tanking. If you're tanking AoE stuff, low-level Mythic Plus, mid-level Mythic Plus even, where you can mass pull and AoE everything down, Bear Druid goes buck wild. If you're in an AoE raid fight, again, Bear Druid goes nuts. The burst damage potential is out of this world. For more conventional single-target-ish raid fights like Rygalon or whatever, which technically isn't all single-target, but more single-target-ish raid fights, it's slower, it's fine, it's tanky, slow and steady, but it's a bit more of a turtle than a race car in those situations. And with that, let's just dive in game, look at the talent tree, go through the key talents, and point out the important stuff. Alright, I am in game, and I'm looking at the Bear Druid talent tree here. And I have two builds to show off here, a raid build and a Mythic Plus build. They're both very similar in their construction. Almost no changes on the right side here. In fact, look, no changes. But on the left side, there is a bit of a change over here. So there are a handful of options that you can move around over here on the right side, but for the most part, this is going to be a pretty set in stone build because of some critical talents like Galactic Guardian and Twin Moonfire. All of these talents down through the middle of both trees are also really valuable, so you're going to want to take those right now and no matter what build you're playing. There will be a little bit more room for customization and branching out once we move out of 10.0 pre-patch and into Dragonflight proper, but for now, pretty much locked in these bottom middle sections. So let's start with the left tree and just go beat by beat and point out all the important talents here. Frenzied Regen up at the top. This is a critical component of your Bear, self-healing toolkit, and you get it for free anyway, so obviously you're going to have that. And Thrash, this is sort of your core AoE damage skill, core rotational skill. Very important to go over here and take Improved Bark Skin and Verdant Heart. These, increase the value of one of your main defensive cooldowns and make you take more healing whenever Frenzied Regen or Bark Skin are up, which is really important. Now, going down this resto line, you'll note that all four of the Druid specs are kind of represented with these vertical columns over here in the class tree. You have Feral represented with Rake, Rip, Feline Swiftness, and Primal Fury. Resto with Rejuve, Swift Mend, Remove Corruption, Natural Recovery, Wild Growth, and Improved Rejuve. And then balance with Starfire, Star Surge, Moonkin Form, Astral Influence, which is pretty nice, Sunfire, blah blah blah. It's nice being able to branch out and get some tools like Innervate or Nature's Vigil. Unfortunately, this Heart of the Wild down here in the bottom, which is sort of like the core cooldown for all druids, but especially for Bear Druids, it's the core thing that you get from this left tree, is just, it's too good to really give up, and it's certainly too expensive to go get these side things. Essentially, you're going to want to just path straight down toward Heart of the Wild. Your option over here on the right side, I just like having Remove Corruption in Mythic Plus Really just because it's nice being able to decurse and remove poison effects. Like, Bear Druids are the only tank that are able to remove curses, and a lot of healers aren't able to remove curses, so having that value is pretty nice in Mythic Plus. In Raid, I wouldn't bother with this. There's way more other people who are capable of taking care of it for you. But being able to come over here and get Nurturing Instinct, get that 6% more magic damage and healing, you know, it's nice. I'm certainly not the first person to point this out, that Bear Druids, or Druids, are the only class in the game now that have 3-point talents left. Nurturing Instinct here, Killer Instinct here, and like Hara's Teachings here. I think those are the only 3-point talents. Obviously, people aren't thrilled about it, and rightly so. Like, this does kind of chew up a lot of your ability to be versatile. Like, if you could have these 3 points back, you might be able to path over here and get to Innervate. But you can't. Obviously, you need to get Iron Fur. That's you know, sort of like trying to play a Prot Warrior without a shield, playing a Bear Druid without Iron Fur. It's, you know, like I've said, most of these options over here on the left tree are pretty non-negotiable. Skull Bash, I mean, technically you could go without Skull Bash, but I would never play a tank without an Interrupt. Seems like a mistake. And a lot of these passive traits are pretty nice. You know, 6% damage reduction, not bad. 6% versatility, not bad. One optional talent here is Wild Charge. Now, you don't have to take this. You could just take Natural Recovery if you don't care about that extra mobility. I like it. I'm willing to give up 2% healing done and healing taken to get a pretty nice little mobility cooldown, but that's very much up to you. Similarly, down here, you could drop Improved Stampeding Roar and put that point into Natural Recovery. You could drop Renewal as well if you don't feel like you need it for whatever you're tanking, but it's a pretty amazing self-heal, you know, basically a health stone on a 90-second cooldown that you can use over and over throughout fights, so what's not to love? Well, anyway, now let's move on to the class tree, and as is the case for most classes, you are pretty much locked into the like top 6 points or so. You know, you have Maul, which isn't really a great skill, but it's at the top of the tree, so you're taking it whether you like it or not. Gore, which is a pretty core rotational component of the class. It gives you a lot more mangles, and it makes mangle generate more rage, which is nice. Survival Instincts is your shield wall. Ursine Adept lets you cast all the spells that you wouldn't normally be able to cast in bear form while you're in bear form. It lets Iron Fur overlap and be a lot more useful for bear than it is for any of the other specs of Druid. And it gives you, again, another 10% damage reduction just all the time. So 10% here, 6% here, versatility here, armor here. Like, you know, Bear Druid has a lot of passive layers going for it. Your first choice node is Brambles versus Bristling Fur. Bristling Fur is useful in raids and single target situations where you are getting hit for a lot of damage. You can pop it and get a lot of rage generation. I generally prefer Brambles just because it's like passive, always on damage and defensive value, and it is a lot better in AoE situations. Lots of, you know, as you can see, it absorbs and reflects up to around 200 damage from each attack at the current level of my gear. So if you're taking a bunch of little hits, you know, 200 damage absorbed from every hit's going to add up fairly quickly. If you're taking like big, slow hits, it's not really going to add up to a lot over the span of a mythic fight. Over here on the right, we have Mangle rank 2, which gives you 20% more damage with Mangle against bleeding targets. This basically just rewards you for using Thrash in single target, which, you know, you're going to want to do anyways. You have a couple of options here that unfortunately don't really go anywhere in terms of pathing. They're sort of like dead ends. You know, you have Infected Wounds, Ursoc's Endurance, Vicious Cycle, and Galactic Guardian, and Front of the Pack. All of these basically are, you know, they're cul-de-sacs, and most of these bonuses aren't that great. Getting like a single target slow is just not really that useful most of the time. Mangle and Maul increasing the damage of the other. It's supposed to create sort of like a back and forth playstyle, but Maul is really rage hungry and it's on the global cooldown, and so it doesn't really do enough to justify going out of your way to take that point. Front of the pack, you know, Stampeding Roar radius and duration is like fine, but to basically like dump a point into an area where you're not getting any sort of pathing, like 5% move speed is not enough of a bonus there. The one exception here, or I guess the two exceptions here, are improved survival instincts, which is pretty good and is potentially worth taking if you're willing to give up this Earth Warden bonus, and Galactic Guardian, which is basically what you're building the whole class around. I didn't really give Earth Warden quite enough credit here. It's a pretty good damage reduction effect, especially when you're being auto-attacked really hard by like raid bosses, for example. Anytime where you can get multiple enemies together and you're only tanking one of them, or whatever. Let's say you have 3 enemies together and you're tanking 2. Earth Warden gets like a lot of extra value. That's very nice. Even in like all-out AoE, like in Mythic Plus, just having the extra damage reduction from Earth Warden is really good. I do think it's worth giving up that second charge of improved survival instincts for the most part. But you could make a case, especially like in Raid, that dropping Earth Warden to pick up improved survival instincts might be worth it if you need the extra defensive cooldowns. Over here on the right side, you have this little cluster of Moonfire talents, and they're all like pretty essential. Scintillating Moonlight, 4% damage reduction, 2% damage reduction a point isn't huge. You know, over here you have 3% damage reduction a point, but you know, it's yet another damage reduction effect. You got 4% here, 6% here, 10% here. It adds up. Twin Moonfire makes it so that Moonfire hits 2 targets and deals 20% more damage. So even in single target, this is a talent that you're going to want to run. You could drop it to pick up Survival Instincts rank 2, but I don't think that's worth doing because of all the other talents that you have that synergize with Moonfire, including Galactic Guardian. Galactic Guardian gives you a 5% chance to trigger a free automatic Moonfire on anyone that you deal damage to. When this occurs, the next Moonfire you cast generates 8 rage and deals triple damage, actually quadruple damage, 300% increased damage. Now, what's interesting about this is that if you have Twin Moonfire talented, it will interact with that. It will not just trigger 1 Moonfire, it spawns 2. And Galactic Guardian procs can consume themselves. So if I get a Galactic Guardian proc here, and then I get another one, let me go ahead and spin some rage. I'm just hitting swipe here, so like I shouldn't be generating rage, but I got a Galactic Guardian proc while I had Galactic Guardian active. So again, all I should be getting is 4 rage and auto attack here. Let's see if I can get another proc. Boom, another 16 rage from the proc and then 4 from an auto attack all at the same time. Let's see if we can do it again. I was dying with some of these procs earlier, but it looks like it's working nice now. Yeah, there we go. That adds up to a ton of rage generation pretty quickly in AoE. It adds up to a lot of damage. Like, these values aren't going to be accurate because I'm attacking lower level training dummies, but as you can see, Moonfire is a pretty substantial amount of your damage. I'll have a breakdown later of me going ham on some real training dummies in the Venthyr class hall, where Moonfire is over half of my damage, even while using all of my offensive cooldowns. Now you have really one sort of big choice here, right in the middle of the tree. As you're pathing down, you can choose to either go through the Tooth and Claw, the Maul range over here on the left, or you can go through Layered Mane and Reinforced Fur. Now, Layered Mane is already a conduit, and frankly, it's not a very good bonus. Like a 10% chance to get 2 stacks of Iron Fur, a 20% chance to not consume Frenzied Regent's cooldown when you use it. These aren't great bonuses. And Reinforced Fur giving you 4% more armor from each Iron Fur stack and a little bit more damage reduction when you have Bark Skin up. Neither of these are all that great. They are slightly more defensive than these two, but they're just not huge value. I think in Mythic Plus you could justify dropping these two because a lot of the time in AoE you're not going to hit Maul. Even if you have 2 stacks of Tooth and Claw up, it's just not worth it to hit Maul rather than just spamming Swipe as your filler. However, even in Mythic Plus, you're going to be in single target sometimes. You know, you're going to be fighting bosses individually. And in those cases, I think that having Tooth and Claw will add enough single target damage filler against those single target bosses that I think it is worth using over Layered Mane and Reinforced Fur, especially considering that you can use the Layered Mane conduit in, say, a General Draven setup, like so, where you would have Layered Mane, Well-Honed Instincts, Tough as Bark, and Condensed Animosphere. You would be running all of those, so you wouldn't even be getting any value out of this. So you're comparing Tooth and Claw and Vulnerable Flesh, which is just small crit chance, to reinforced Fur only. I think the left side in that case is still better. And now we have like the really interesting stuff down here in the bottom middle of the tree. While in Bear From, you deal 20% increased arcane damage. This applies to Moonfire. Circle of Life and Death makes it so that your dot effects do their damage in 25% less time. Basically what this means is that as long as you're maintaining your dots all the time, which you easily are, you're going to have Thrash and Moonfire up all the time very effortlessly, they basically just do 25% more damage. That's pretty incredible for one talent point to get 25% more damage out of your dots, considering that your dots are the majority of your damage. Elun's Favored is probably the thing that ties the whole spec together the best. While in bear form, you deal 10% increased arcane damage and are healed for 30% of all arcane damage done. Again, if I can pull up a more real log here of me just kind of going off on some dummies. This is AoE. Moonfire, over half of my damage. So you're getting 30% healing on around half of your damage in AoE. That's pretty good. I mean, 15-ish% leech. That's pretty nice. Down here in the bottom, you have the choice of Incarn or Convoke the Spirits. Unfortunately, as a fan of Night Fae, I really did like Convoke the Spirits in bear form. I thought it was pretty cool to be able to, use it in cat form for single target DPS or balance form for AoE DPS, or as a sort of impromptu cooldown in bear form. But it can't compete with Incarn. Incarn is a huge damage increase, and Convoke is not. I realized in the process of editing this that I forgot to mention Ursoc's Guidance. This isn't like an absolutely critical talent, but it is really definitely worth getting. The amount of cooldown reduction that you get out of rage expenditure can vary a little bit depending on your rage generation. Usually you'll average somewhere between like 5 and 7 rage per second, which means that on average this is going to cut about 30 to 45 seconds off the cooldown of Incarnation, which is fantastic. So this is definitely a bonus that you want to have in any situation. Now I want to point out a really important talent that you should not take, and that is Berserk Unchecked Aggression. This is a very, very bad talent to take right now if you're in Shadowlands content, and the reason for that is this conduit right here, Unchecked Aggression. There's a bug with conduit tooltip values. This says it gives 15% haste. At 278 item level it doesn't, it gives like over 30% haste. This talent says it gives 15% haste and reduces the rage cost of Maul by 50%. That's great. Like, getting 15% haste while in Incarn or Berserk is really good. If you're not in Shadowlands content, you should go out of your way to take this talent, even at the expense of dropping Earth Warden to get it. The problem is that by running the talent, it disables the conduit, and the conduit gives over twice as much haste. So with this going, with the conduit working when I'm in Shadowlands content and I'm in Berserk, I have over 70% haste. Right now, base 32%. I'm just going to hearth to Revendreth Class Hall and show the difference. I am in the Revendreth Class Hall, and now I'm going to show off the difference between the two Berserks. Here we are, 32% haste. Now I hit Berserk, 76% haste. Humongous haste increase. If I was running this talent, that conduit would be disabled and I would be getting around 50% haste. That's a humongous drop off. Also, if you're running the conduit, the rage cost reduction does not work. You have a lot of options. You can put that point into Earth Warden, you can put it into Survival Instincts, you can put it into Persistence. I think that Earth Warden is by far the most consistent damage reduction value and just generally the best value all around for that point option. And just to compare the raid build real quickly here at the end, as I said earlier, Remove Corruption is really nice for being able to remove curse effects and poison effects in Mythic Plus dungeons or, just sort of like solo and world content and all. But in raid, that's pretty low value. I would much rather have the extra range on all my abilities that I get from Astral Influence. Again, I have dropped 1 point in Nurturing Instinct, which is a DPS loss. Losing magic damage and healing is... magic damage is about half of the damage you deal, so you're losing about 1% overall damage to get Wild Charge. I think this is pretty optional. You could definitely give this up, and if there are any situations where you're, not going to be needing to give your group Stampeding Roar more often than every 2 minutes, you just drop that, and then boom, there you go. Another optional point. As you can see, the talents over here on the right side, all the same. I think if you're leveling up right now and, you're not 60 yet, you're going to want to beeline right toward Galactic Guardian and Twin Moonfire, and then make your way toward the bottom of the tree through really whichever side, but eventually relocating over towards this left side and filling this out later on. All right, well, I don't really have too much left to say, but I do kind of want to get Incarn back off a cooldown just to have a laugh at how much damage this deals. It really is quite fun to see the damage value get big. Look at those Galactic Guardian procs go. Just keeps triggering over and over and over again. In keeping with everything else about the class, Bear Druid's rotation is simple and hasn't changed all that much. No matter what offensive cooldowns you have, you want to use them all pretty much on cooldown and layer them all on top of each other, along with on-use trinkets and an agility potion to maximize their value. The one exception here is that if you are playing Vinth here and you're in Shadowlands areas, you want to wait until Ravenous Frenzy is available to use Incarn. You want to layer those on top of each other every time, regardless of whether they get desynced or whatever. If you're outside of Shadowlands areas, or you've reduced the cooldown of Incarn by like over a minute, then you can desync them and you'll want to hold on to Ravenous Frenzy until the next Incarn is up. But if it's like 30 seconds, then you should wait to use Incarn. One quick note about Heart of the Wild is that it has been changed quite a bit from Shadowlands, and it is on the GCD now, which is kind of lame, but it works much stronger than it used to. When you use Heart of the Wild, your off-spec skills all get buffed. This means that kitty cat abilities, resto heals, and magic damage from skills such as Moonfire will deal more damage or healing or whatever. So using Heart of the Wild and then using Incarn and Ravenous Frenzy means all of the tons and tons of Moonfire procs that you get in AoE will deal 30% more damage, which is huge. You should maintain Iron Fur anytime you're tanking, use Frenzy Regen and Renewal whenever your health drops low, and otherwise just keep Moonfire up on your targets, use Thrash and Mangle on cooldown, and spend any free globals either on Moonfire if you're in single target, or Swipe if you're in AoE, or casting Maul if you have tons of rage and you want to spend it on a not very good single target damage skill. As for consuming Galactic Guardian procs, you can hit them as they come up if you really need the rage generation for some reason, but otherwise you're generally better off letting them sit until they're about to expire and only consuming them manually. Manually consuming a Galactic Guardian proc is better than just wasting it, obviously, but getting the next Galactic Guardian proc to consume the one before is always better. You're essentially getting the damage of that Galactic Guardian proc for free tied onto whatever global you use to trigger it, so Swipe or Thrash or whatever. Also, I think I've said this in the talent section, but I just want to reiterate it here. Running Twin Moonfire makes the Galactic Guardian proc trigger rage generation for both targets that it hits, so rage values are way up in any kind of situation that has more than one target now, and that makes Druids a lot more fun to play, I have to admit. As for stats for Bear Druids, item level is king, agility is your best stat, and agility increases are mostly tied to item level, so whenever in doubt, go for higher item level. If you're comparing two pieces that are around the same item level, versatility is the best secondary stat, with haste pretty close in value right behind it. Mastery and crit are both fine, but they're generally lower value. Now let's cover legendaries. You have two options, Legacy of the Sleeper and Ursoc's Fury Remembered. Ursoc's Fury Remembered was the go-to legendary for all of Shadowlands because it offered a lot of sustained defensive value and a decent chunk of offensive value as well. All of the Moonfire talents basically override that. I mean, you can stack them both up. It's going to make you a lot more tanky, but the self-healing you get from Moonfire is more than enough to compensate for giving that defensive bonus of Ursoc's Fury Remembered up. Thanks to Legacy of the Sleeper, you turn into just like a hulking killing machine whenever you use Incarn, and doing damage is always more fun, so I would recommend using Legacy of the Sleeper for everything. As soon as you pop Incarn, you just want to pull like crazy in Mythic Plus and just absolutely thrash everything into bits. And finally, the best covenant for Bear Druid is Venthyr. Ravenous Frenzy synergizes very nicely with Legacy of the Sleeper to give you another cooldown to layer onto Incarnation. It boosts your damage to absolutely insane levels, and you can just kill everything. I have a video running under this of me doing way over 100,000 DPS to a 5-pack of training dummies, and I'm not buffed. I used drums, so not even a real lust, and I used them late, but still, 5 mobs, and I'm just going crazy here with this damage, and my Bear Druid's like half geared, decently geared. I think it's sub-heroic raid item level. Just spamming Thrash for 30 seconds straight with Incarn, Ravenous Frenzy, Legacy of the Sleeper, and Agility Pot, and Lust. 100,000 damage, 20,000 damage a mob. Not bad. Alright, well, I think that pretty much covers it. I had very low expectations for Bear Druids in patch 10.0, but I have to say I really like the way they play. It's a very simple tank, but it absolutely checks all the boxes you want from a tank. It's tanky, which that's important. It has reliable self-healing and pretty good sustained damage, and it has good offensive and defensive cooldowns. The Moonfire changes seemed really simple and underwhelming when you first look at them in the talent tree, like it just seems like nothing. But they are like the secret sauce that Bear Druids have been missing since Legion, and I think that Dragonflight is going to be a much better expansion for Bear Druids than BFA or Shadowlands have been. I'm actually coming out of all of this testing and playing around with Bear Druid very positive. My initial thought process had basically been that I would come in and say, you know, it's okay, you can play it if you're like a balanced druid or a resto druid and you have to tank for some friends, you can play it. But no, I'm going to enjoy playing Bear Druid for real in Season 1 of Dragonflight. It's actually going to be fun. It's incredibly fun right now with all the legendaries and covenants just multiplying your damage to the moon. But even without them, it's not bad. All right then. Let me know if you have any questions, like and subscribe, and thank you for watching. Bye.